Good morning. This is a very sad day for me. And it's very sad, not because my term is finishing, but because up until this week, I actually thought the people in NHS Providers liked me. But here I am talking at 9:20 in the morning after the dinner, and I think I have to go away and reflect on that. I've had a very disturbed night because as I was leaving the dinner last night, two people asked me, was I going to say anything interesting and was it worth getting up in the morning? But you know, that's what you come to expect when you work in this wonderful thing called the NHS. So I'm going to talk, I've been given some time. Ron Kerr sadly can't join us because of family issues. But I'm going to talk really about three things. A bit about my observations from NHS Providers and the fun I've had here. A little bit about my history, the things I'm really proud and amazed that's been achieved in my time in the NHS. And then some things I am really disappointed about. And they're not about blaming others for what hasn't happened, because I and we all take accountability for the things that haven't happened. So that's what I'm going to talk about, really, as we go forward. So NHS Providers, I was really surprised when people approached me. Would I be willing to be considered to be chair of the organisation? I thought my previous incarnation in the NHS Confederation would have ruled me out of consideration, because all my life I've been a one-nation NHS person, if there is such a thing. And I'd gone off to Wales, actually, because I thought we'd reached the end of history. I'd been working in the NHS Confederation. We'd had some successes, we'd had some failures. We'd become influential, I think, in terms of influencing things. And one of the things and the importance of membership organisations is articulating on behalf of members with the most senior people in the system what's really important to the people who deliver the service day after day. And our members, you, always like it when there's a bit of pointy stick in that, but we get a little bit further when it's part of the charm and the guile and all of those sorts of things. And I think we played, and I contributed to that in the NHS Confederation, quite well in that sort of space. And then Darzi came along. And do you remember Darzi? A moment of complete congruity between what the centre thought and what the front line thought, about what was important in strategic terms and what had to be delivered locally. And it almost felt like the end of history, because we had, for the first time, a set of things that if you went round the country, it was manageable, it was achievable, it was based on the best of local, integrated with a clinical perspective and evidence. And it was wonderful. Yeah, it was wonderful. But as a membership organisation, I thought, well, what am I going to do now if there are no more pointy sticks that need to be wielded on behalf of the service? So I went to Wales. I was given the opportunity to take what I regard as the biggest public health job in the world. And there I was responsible for 20 devolved areas, not just health. And it was absolutely fun. And I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. When I came back, and it was only 4 and a bit years, I could not believe what I'd come back to. I'd left an understanding between the centre and the front line, an understanding of how the different bits came together, albeit with challenges around that, into something where, quite frankly, I couldn't read a document about the NHS because we changed all the 3-letter acronyms completely. I didn't know what they were. We had a structure and domains and all sorts of things that if you'd asked anybody that I met to explain to me, what on earth is this NHS now, nobody could do it for me. It was complex, confused, ambiguous, and a lack of clarity about accountability and what happened. So when I came back, I was particularly taken with the challenge that that's created for organisations that have to deliver 24/7, 365 days a year on behalf of patients. And the organisations that 365 days a year, 24/7, have to unleash the talents and the capabilities of all their staff to deliver those things for patients. And I felt in the reforms, the bit that was being slagged off, and it was being slagged off particularly, was the provider sector. So when I was asked and given the opportunity to become chair, I thought it was an immense privilege and immense fun. I was also struck when I came back, we'd almost turned the pyramid over, and the amount of effort and energy being invested in the regulatory function as opposed to the delivery function was amazing. I did some work, first of all, with the Cancer Alliance, and there was some specialist commissioning work going on, and they wanted to do some work about domiciliary cancer services. So to produce this piece of work, the apparatus that we'd then generated, it took clinicians from each of the 12 hospitals, the lead clinicians around this particular issue. It put them in a room for 14 months for an afternoon to produce, in the end, an 84-page document on home chemotherapy. And then, because at that point you disseminate it, it was then sent out to the 12 clinicians who were the leads for the hospital to implement in their patch. And I felt that was an absolute sterile waste of time. You could have written that commissioning strategy on one side of A4, based on best practice that everybody knew, and actually trusting the views, the vision, and the commitment of individual clinicians and their organizations. So I became very interested in this balance. And we did quite a bit of work at various times when I was at the Confed. And some of you may remember one of my favorite pieces at the Confed, where we collected all the documents that had been sent out to give guidance to you. And it was a good half me again. So there was a picture of the guidance and me over a period of time. And we don't have a lot of those documents, but the burden was still there. So coming to NHS Providers was great, and I have had such fun. I've had fun because I work with a great team. Chris is fantastic to work with, Saffron, and people who may not be as visible to you externally, Adam, Mark. They are an immensely strong director team. And they have strength in depth. You know, people, Miriam, and all the people who do the work, so the stuff that actually comes out from us is high quality. And it's been an immense pleasure working with them. But I think the thing that's been more of a pleasure, even than working with them, is the ethos that shines through this organisation. We say we're a member organisation, and we genuinely are. I know member organisations who say they're members, but regard members as a little bit of a problem to be dealt with in a box over there, whilst we, the people who know, get on with the day-to-day business. That is not NHS Providers. Everything we do and everything we've done has been shaped by what the people in the service, what the people who are our members and pay our fees tell us is important. We're very lucky. We have an elected board. And if anyone ever tells you you can't run systems through an elected board, please shout at them, because an elected board brings real people living in the service on a day-to-day basis, sharing the issues that are relevant to them with us as an organisation. And I think it's been a real strength of this organisation, the elected board, and it's kept us real. And over my time, about a fifth of members, member trusts, have had somebody sitting on the board during that period of time. That means members are real, immediate. And whatever you do with this organisation, because it is your organisation, please keep keeping that real for us, because that's what makes the difference. And the bits I've enjoyed most about it, I've loved working with people in NHS Providers and, you know, the policy and all of that sort of stuff. But the best bit is the bit coming out to visit you. Many of you have been very kind with your time. You've taken me and shown me things that have been incredible, mostly incredible on a positive sense, but also some places you've shown me of things that you're not happy with and not achieving, and infrastructure and things like that, which are incredible, because we shouldn't be trying to deliver 21st century healthcare in those type of facilities. And the difference as you walk around in organisations, from the places that have had investment in new facilities to deliver the sorts of care we can now, And in the same organisation, the places where people strive to do their best with the environment, but they can't because of the nature of it, it's palpable as you walk around. So I leave NHS providers with a couple of beliefs that are very strong. I'm always a passionate supporter of place. Place is really important because that's what people identify with. And place may be how we're now talking about it, a community or whatever. But place is also my ward, my hospital, my mental health organisation, my community team. Place is important because people think in things that are relevant to them. And we need to get into we have a bit of a lazy mindset at the moment where we try to shoehorn things together that have no common purpose, no common value set, and believe that if you take a broken institution here and mix it with a well-run institution here, you'll get one well-run, bigger institution. The story, as we all know, is you actually get one well-run but failing bigger organisation. The other thing I believe passionately, and I believe more strongly now than I would have done years ago, is about the importance of boards. Boards are the glue that run through the organisation. And when you have a good and effective board, you can see it in the performance of the organisation and in the attitude and the behaviour of people around that. Strong boards who feel accountable and responsible for what goes on in their organisations, who feel respectful and proud of the people who work in the organisation, and feel humble enough to know that they will get it wrong at times, but actually, every time you get it wrong is an opportunity to leapfrog and achieve wonder. So I leave very committed to the board model. And I leave really with one other anxiety, which I won't come back to, which is the challenge in doing everything we do in health without a proper understanding of social care and how that fits in and how it dovetails. And, you know, I do work and I talk to local government, and there are massive financial problems, but sometimes at a local level, we fail to understand their imperatives as well as ours, and that's really important. So I leave having had a wonderful 6 years. I've made lots of friends. I've seen some fantastic things. I've had some real fun. I've had lots of laughter. And I feel really blessed to have had the opportunity to be the chair of NHS Providers. And when I was thinking about this, it automatically took me into thinking about my career and the progress. When I qualified, we had very limited drugs. About a fifth of medical wards were full of people with ulcer problems. And we used to put them on milk and bed rest, both of which are pretty good in killing people, but, you know, we did it anyway. And if that didn't settle them down, why would it, brackets, we took out their stomachs, or we cut their vagus nerve, which is the main nerve supplying that part of the chest. And that was the most common operations that we did in the NHS. Well, what happens now? We know there is a bacteria, H. pylori, and most people with ulcers are treated with drugs, which didn't exist in my day, and cured. Incredible progress, incredible amount of human suffering avoided. Just before I qualified, we'd found a perfect way to kill cardiac patients. We used to put them on bed rest, and I remember they'd be, as a medical student, they'd be flat, and we'd sit them up a few inches every day. And after about 4 days, they were allowed to wash their own faces. And, you know, we'd feed them day one because we couldn't possibly have them risking themselves by lifting a hand. And guess what? A very high proportion died of pulmonary embolus because they were static in bed. Look what we do now. We have miracle treatments that can actually treat with intervention very rapidly blockages in arteries, and we mobilize people as fast as we can because actually the body knows better than often the medical profession. But we had really bad things in my time. I remember as a registrar in medicine, I had a 42-year-old man who had renal failure. and I was trying to get him dialysis to keep his life going. Without it, he was going to die. And the questions I was asked, not, well, how bad is his renal failure? What's his glomerular filtration? How are you treating all of this? Were, is he married? Because if he's not married, he ain't getting on the list. Does he have children? Because if he's got children, then he's obviously more worthy, and we should definitely dialyse him. And the killer question, is he in work? Because if he's not in work, we're not going to dialyse him, because actually he's not a productive member of society. And that sort of prejudice and attitude was written large through the way we treated people and we justified. Thank heavens we've moved beyond that in many of the areas, but we still have this sort of discrimination and attitude sitting around. I'm also proud because I was the generation, we shut big institutions. Do you remember that? We were really proud. We took institutions, some of which were had suffered with the cooling tower scandals, where institutionalization, which everybody thinks is about the patient, but is actually equally about the staff and the people who work in these institutions, we shut it and we changed our attitudes to people with severe and enduring mental health and learning disability problems. And I'm really proud that we did those things. I'm not proud that somewhere along the journey we lost the political will and we ended up without the community resources that were needed to make this a really wholehearted transfer. Many places stopped at shutting the institutions and the other stuff wasn't there. But I'm proud. And I still go back to the days and the learning of how you do that in terms of large-scale change. And many people who've never worked in the mental health sector should be talking to people with our history, because they've got lessons for everybody in the world we live in today. On workforce, when I went to medical school, there was a quota. The quota was only 20% of the intake into the medical school could be women, because we were all going to have babies and things like that, and we weren't really capable of doing anything that might require real brain work or brute force like orthopedics. And there was one consultant surgeon, Avril Mansfield, in Liverpool, and there were about half a dozen female physicians. And I worked with one of them, and I tell you, they were the most scary people I've ever worked with, because they'd had to cope with day after day prejudice in getting to those sorts of senior roles. And for me, it's always shaped my attitude, because that was the experience for women then. Just think of all the people who are living with disadvantage and discrimination today, who are living what I thought was over all of that time. General practice had only just been discovered. 1968, Lord John Horder, the future general practitioner, the document that really laid out how we think about general practice today, it had just been published. But we had a system where if you talked and used the word clinician, it was coded for doctors, because nobody else mattered, just the doctors. And we're in a much better, healthier world now. And I was really interested because I did a little survey at my medical school, 20% women, 80% men. The nurses training in the same place had higher A-level grades than the men who filled up the 80%, on average, on average. In terms of governance, I remember the units, and I remember boards having votes. Do you remember that? I want my vote recorded. It just wouldn't fit in today's world. And it could be very positive, because it had a link in to local government on a day-to-day basis and the workforce. But it could be the death of ambition in every sort of way. And I was really excited when Griffiths came along, because it did talk about a clarity of accountability, a clarity of leadership. And Griffiths, some of you may remember, they made a really hard effort. I don't know whether it was planned or not, but I suspect there was a planning in it, that they had one of everything in the regional directors. So we had a doctor, Rosemary Rue in Oxford, and we had a nurse, Catherine Hawkins, in the Southwest. And I always remember, just after Griffiths, sitting in a room, and I sometimes think the ghost is with us today. And somebody was asking, well, how do we produce change in this difficult time? And the baritone voice comes from the back, fear. That was Catherine Hawkins. She was a formidable lady. But we had a regional office, and there's a bit of work going on at the moment to look at what was the learning from the regional offices, regional health authorities. And for me, there was something very powerful about this juxtaposition of a management cohort together with an autonomous board. And the boards in the regional offices, regional health authorities, did a phenomenal amount of keeping the noise. I actually think we wouldn't have been in some of this mess if we'd still had regional chairmen of the ilk of the people I grew up with, because they were big beasts. They sat in a room every month with the Secretary of State, and this is why they were got rid of, and would say, well, Minister, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I can tell you this will be the impact. And because they were big beasts and they were grandees, the ministers actually listened to them. And I'm aware of a number of false mistakes that were actually stopped because of the regional chairs. And the most powerful managerial intervention I've ever seen came from a regional chair. And it just shows, you know, 3 words. Michael Carlisle in Trent had been involved with the Atchison Review, which was trying to look at public health and how you engage public health in a more meaningful way. And he got very captured by the concept of population health and that health services existed to serve people with illness. Yeah, good, that was neat. And he started off, and we used to have regional reviews. Do you remember those? And they'd have a table, and you'd sit opposite the person with the same heading as you, and you'd have eyeball to eyeball, and they'd ask you a question, and you'd rehearse for months to make sure that if they'd asked you about the timetable on the Tokyo Underground, you would have been able to answer that, you know, really sparkling. So Michael Carlisle, on the very first regional review, said, before we go into the review, and remember, Brian Edwards was the chief executive, and the review letter had already been written before you sat in and had the conversation. And he said, before we start the main part, I just want to know, what are the major health issues in your patch? And the chief exec took a deep breath of, thank God, not for me, I'm let off, turned, and you know, we've all done it, you know, would you like to answer that, public health physician? And the public health physician started. And Carlisle said, not him, you. That evening, every chief executive in that region started to ask the question about what is the conditions? Gosh, we have more of this than anywhere else. Why? And it was the most transformational, single, powerful intervention. And I've always looked for what my legacy would be like that, and sadly, I've never found it. So you know, those are the things I think have come on and we can learn from. But I have some disappointments. Firstly, how come we have failed to convince the population that health services are not about buildings or beds? You know, how can a system which is about people interacting with people, maybe with some digital in the way, still be obsessed with a piece of furniture called a bed? Yeah? How can you assess the quality of a service by the numbers of pieces of furniture? And we have failed. We've sat over as the systems become medicalized, as drugs, you know, some of you would be generalized anxiety disorder, never existed. The drug company came up with a drug that actually didn't tackle what they wanted it to tackle, but it was very good for nebulous bit of anxiety, you know, living in New York in the 20th century. And they actually hired a marketing company to market this new disease called generalized anxiety disorder. And within a year, through that sort of process, they'd convinced doctors it existed, they convinced patients it existed, and the drug was the highest seller in New York State. Incredible. That is medicalization. And we're doing it now, and we're doing it with opioids and things like that. I'm disappointed about our structural debates. Yeah, we yo-yo. We've got to be big because there's not enough managers. Oh, we've got to be small because we've got to be local. They're not a dichotomy. If you're big, you have to work small to do and engage people because people think small. And if you're small, you have to cooperate to do big. But we yo-yo between the two because if you're a politician and you want to do something that looks as if you're active and interventionist and doing something, then the easiest way to do it is move the deck chairs and have some displacement activity by restructuring big or small. Clinical involvement. Somewhere along the way, we've not got this right. And I remember when units and trusts came in, and the first thing that happened, there was a desire through a lot of managers and a lot of organisations to stop their consultants talking to GPs. I never understood that, because with commissioning, if I'd been sat there, first thing I'd have done is want my consultants talking to GPs every minute of the day, because that's where my money comes, is through that interface. But they were actually split. So as I grew up, my training every week was mixed with a consultant and a GP, and actually, we didn't call it pathways, but that's what emerged from the joint learning that happened on a regular basis. And somewhere, we've got to reconstruct that, because what we've got at the moment is everybody trying to influence everybody else's bit of the system rather than thinking of how they interface. And that means we're averse to looking for where the money is. And the money is with the doctors. It's in the clinical processes. It's with the nurses on the wards. That's where the money in the NHS is, and that's where we need to think. The saddest thing for me is that we still don't learn about planning and regulation. We have plans that are unrealistic. The expectation, you can't even hold it in your brain. You know, the average person can handle at any one time 3 plus or minus 2 items, even if they're a woman. That's all we can handle. And yet we're given things that are so complex that you go out and you try to explain it to people. What's the coherence? What are we trying to do? It's very difficult to do that. One of the things I learned in Wales, and was very powerful, is that it's really important to have a strong strategic vision. And when Rodri Morgan was there, he had a vision for Wales, which was strong enough and powerful enough that we could use as the unifying principle across the public sector, and people would sign up to it. They didn't need to know the nitty-gritty of what that meant in Neath Port Talbot, because it was strong enough that everything they did could be judged against that strategic vision. When he went and his successor had no strategic vision, that all flew away. Nobody knew that if they did this, it took them in the right direction or it took them away. And that lack of clarity about the vision is really important. The Bible says, where there is no vision, the people perish. There's another side to that, though, and some of you will remember Beverly Malone, who came over from America. She'd been senior in Bill Clinton's government, and she came over to run the RCN. And whenever people talked about vision, she would say and remind them, yes, but vision without action is merely hallucination. And we spend a tremendous amount of time, I think, in the hallucinatory box, where we are not clear how we're going to deliver, even if we know what we're going to deliver. And we've forgotten things like the public health view. Public health is not someone to go and do a task of telling you about the determinants of health. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of considering how we analyse the problems that face us in a different way from the pure clinical and the pure managerial. And somewhere along the journey, we've missed all of that. My final bit is about what good and effective regulation looks like. Because I think we're in a time where, and I'm very pleased, Dido talks very passionately about people and how important it is, and it is. But at the heart of all of this has to be respect. Respect for people's jobs, respect for the things they do, an understanding of what they do that you can't do, and just admiration on all sides for what goes on. But I have a metaphor for what I believe you should be pushing for from the regulator. Have you ever been to a perfect dinner party? You know, the lights are just right, The table is perfect. There's just the right number of people, and they're sparkling, witty conversation. Witty conversation. The tablecloth's white. I like it white. And there's nice glasses, and the wine has been poured, and it reflects through the glass and makes shimmery colours on the tablecloth. Have you ever been to one of those? At the end of the evening, you all go out and you say to the hostess or host, "What a wonderful evening, thank you." You don't thank the table. But it's the table that actually has created the environment, given the incentives, given the relationships that allow everything to be wonderful. So I believe that the task for the next few years is to make the regulators into a table. If they can be a table, then you will all have a place that you can deliver to the best of your ability and in a way that gives you a really sparkling evening. It's a very humble view of the role, but it's the only way that all the evidence says you will truly deliver. So the task I leave you with, I hope, is pride in what you do, a challenge to do more, and a commitment to doing it through the people, because your organizations are only social constructs to unleash human endeavor. They're actually based to allow groups of people to catch wildebeest. That's what you run, our selective wildebeest catching organizations. You may call it a hospital, you may call it a community trust, it may be a mental health organization, but it's to unleash human endeavor. And if you unleash that human endeavor to the best of your ability, then your organization will zing. If you don't unleash it, it won't. So I leave you with, make sure you hunt wildebeest successfully and turn the regulators into a table. Thank you.